Welcome back to the Impact Driven Leader podcast. This is your host, Tyler Dickerhuff. Excited to bring back the first guest ever of the Impact Driven Leader podcast, Ryan Hawk, author of that book right there, The Pursuit of Excellence. The Pursuit of Excellence is the book of the month for the Impact Driven Leader Book Club here in March. Make sure you grab a copy of that if you have not already been notified. Ryan and I have just a wide-ranging conversation. And it's a little bit about the pursuit of excellence, but really it's about him as a person. It's his experience going through developing and continuing the Learning Leader podcast and community and everything he's doing now. We share a lot of our interactions. It's much more of a back and forth conversation than it is an interview. If you've been a longtime guest, you know that's my style. That's my preference. That's where I feel you learn the most. Excited to share this episode with you. Excited to share this conversation. We'll meet back at the end and I'll hit on a couple high level notes that Ryan really shared that really made me stop and think, but also appreciate the journey that we're on together. So thanks for listening and we'll catch you at the end. Ryan, excited to be back with you. Love this opportunity to catch up. All right. So I just made a comment right before I hit record that your last episode, podcast episode that released at the time of this recording is with Dan Martell. If you haven't listened in the audience, please go listen to it. And this is the question I'm going to ask that leads into me saying it was different. What instance have moved you from being very substance focused to connection focused? And let me frame it in. Maybe you forgot about the episode. You made a comment halfway, 3/4 of the way through that episode. And you're like, man, we haven't even talked about your book, Dan's book, which I imagine is amazing, which is 75% of your outline. And you're 3/4 of the way through the episode. And you're like, I haven't even asked those. What?
Yeah. Well, so the difference with Dan's episode or that conversation with Dan was we had talked 4 or 5 years ago. And one of the things I try to do when I have conversations, especially if a friend like Jason Gaynard introduces me to somebody who Jason has never steered me wrong in his introductions, is I take a lot of notes. And so we talked for like an hour and a half over the phone, and I took tons of notes, and Dan talked probably 85 to 90% of the time during the initial phone call, which is a little not normal, I would say, for those, but I was mainly because I kind of asked them questions just like I would on my podcast. And so instead of just going straight into the book, I went into some of the notes that I had taken from our previous call. And before I realized that, the kind of conversation had gotten away from me. Not that like we're there to only sell a book or promote a book, but there are some guests, not many anymore, who come on my show, I guess, but there are some guests who really want to talk about whatever the thing is they're promoting. Yeah. Dan did not necessarily care at all. In fact, I think he enjoyed it. We had a good conversation afterwards about that fact too, because he had been in the heavy promotion stage of book launch and talking about it a lot. So I think he enjoyed the fact that he could kind of talk about his origin story, his life, cold emailing, making the big ask, books that have impacted him the most, things that I had asked him about. And so it turned out, I think, to be a really cool conversation and a great episode, but not necessarily what I had outlined or thought it would go. But I think that's why we do this, Tyler, right? I think you're the same way. You do this to connect. You do this to have deep, long form conversations with one person and build a relationship. And, usually that happens because you ask interesting questions that you're deeply curious about, and then you ask even better follow-up questions because you're a good listener. And when you do that, that's how I think you can connect both with the person you're talking to as well as with the person who's listening. And fortunately, I think more of my conversations, more of my episodes have turned out that way than most.
Is that something that you think you started with? Or it's evolved to that? When you kind of mentioned that, it's like, there's a lot of either guests or authors that were trying to promote something where you didn't maybe have the opportunity to have those kind of, real conversations.
I think as you get more repetition, you get more comfortable doing this, and you also get get more comfortable, like almost in your own skin as an interviewer, as a conversationalist, and that then helps you go in whatever direction you're most curious about. And I've also gotten good feedback both from mentors and random people who listen that they seem to connect and like the episodes of my podcast when they can tell I'm asking the questions that I'm most curious about, not just teeing them up to tell the fun story from their book. So I also like having guests on who aren't promoting anything, which I have quite a bit of. So it's kind of a good mix. And even if they are promoting something, I tell them ahead of time before we hit record, listen, you don't have to sell your book. If you are engaging and informative, a great storyteller, they'll buy whatever you're selling. So don't feel like you have to mention your book or name drop that or whatever. It's really about you kind of being, I think, an interesting person. And then people say, well, I want more. I want more.
Yeah.
And then the book is one of those avenues to get more.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. It's why I do what I do. And, I think probably last episode, which was the very first episode of the Impact Driven Leader that I had you as a guest, you agreed. And, as I've hopefully learned and grown in well over 100 episodes now, the thing that I really enjoy is being able to have an outline, prepare, as a preparer like you are, and to set it aside and never even go there. Because the conversation is so good and so rich that it leads to points where, again, things that would, yes, have your book here. Great. We're going to, feature your book as part of the book club here in March when this releases. But yet I want to hear the things that aren't in there that actually enrich that book. Yeah,
I'm with you. I think that's those are the conversations that I like to think of. Well, if we were going out to lunch, what would we talk about?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why I tell them, these are the exact questions I would probably ask you if we were sharing a meal. The difference is we're going to record it. We're going to have like I said, a deep, long form, meaningful conversation and get closer and potentially build a relationship. That's the most kind of rewarding and fulfilling aspect of this. It's and actually initially surprising because I wasn't sure if that would happen, but it has, and that's a really cool thing especially for a lot of the guests, they're people I deeply admire and look up to and have read their work or follow what they're doing. And then to be able to form and build some sort of relationship with them is really cool.
Yeah. Well, this is a piece from it and kind of follow up what I started with is I think that's so much of a change in leadership that leaders that actually approach their relationships within their organization in that way actually lead much, much better. Instead of being the leader that has to, have a position and, very authoritarian and very directive and more relationship and connection driven, I think over time, and we've seen more of that, those are the leaders that make an impact.
Yeah. I mean, authenticity is a big word. Being real when it comes to your messaging, certainly learning from others, learning from mentors, but not in the way that you're somebody else or you try to be. You see this in sports all the time. Maybe somebody was an assistant coach for a while and they get their own head coaching job and they just try to mimic the person before them. And usually that doesn't work that well. I like I said, I think you should take bits and pieces from all of your mentors and teachers and people who have led you from before, but then ultimately you got to find your own voice and it's got to be real. People don't follow leaders if they don't think they're authentic and they're not real. And so that's why I think humility is a big quality in leaders and being an effective leader that is becoming much more talked about now. But in the past, it was something that was almost like you had to hide. And now I think it's much more out in the open.
Do you think that's changed in like the time that you've been, learning leader, 8 years, right? Do you think that's something that's changed or was there at the beginning, but it's just way more like, oh, this is a big deal to be that authentic, to be that vulnerable, to, as a friend of mine, Brad Lomanick says, stand in front of the room, throw your arms up in the air and say, yeah, I got sweaty pits. It's okay. We're all in this together. Is that something you've seen or you've championed? Like, explain to me kind of your deeper thought on that.
It feels like it's much more common now. It's almost to the point where now the essays that are being written are like, don't go too far. It's like people are going too far with that. So whenever you start seeing those things come out, we've probably hit an inflection point on authenticity, on being real. So yeah, it's just striking that balance. And I think that's where having a good level of an emotional intelligence, of understanding that we want to be transparent, we want to be honest, we want to be authentic, but also not like cross the line of being an oversharer. Yeah. So I think the effective leaders are figuring out where that is. We talked about Insight Global before we were recording, Tyler, and one of the most effective speakers and leaders I've ever seen when it comes to knowing how to be humble and authentic and real is Bert Bean. He's a CEO at Insight Global, and Bert's like, I don't know how he does it. Like he just always seems to strike the right chord. But when I ask him that, he doesn't have like a calculus, or he doesn't have like, well, this is exactly how you do that. He just kind of is what he is. And I think that's why it comes across the way he does. Now, he practices his keynotes. He's ready for any speech to the company. His communications to the entire company, which their 4,000 or 5,000 employees, are written by him, edited by him. So I think when you find your own voice and you use that voice, your people know. They know. And they also know when a comms team has got a hold of an email. And it's just so different. And so I give leaders huge credit there are comms people at the company, but I give leaders huge credit who, yes, they'll listen and they'll talk to them and they'll have strategy sessions. But at the end of the day, it's got to be their message. It's got to come from their voice, and it's got to be from them. And that's why communication skill and developing your voice is just it's essential, I think, if you want to be an effective leader, especially of a team of any size.
Okay. I want you let's just chat about this. With that moment, that said, ChatGPT is everywhere. Somebody the other day is like, if you're not using it, you're going wrong. And I said to him, it's like, I played with it. And this is what I found, is that my thoughts are so far different that even using it, it was like the difference between a rocky road or like a very flavorful, has a lot of element ice cream compared to vanilla. Yeah, vanilla, it may have worked. And so I look at that, and a question I had for you is like, how do you see that changing in the space of thought leaders? People that try to put out content. You talk about if someone in a comms team used ChatGPT and said, hey, this came from our executive. If that's not authentic and real, people are going to catch up real quick. Does that lend to I'm not so polished, but yet I'm real, that people are going to gravitate towards that? I also imagine those tools like ChatGPT and others will get a lot better. I think right now they're in the infancy stages, so they're not. It's not great. It's helpful for some things. I've worked with people who utilize those tools to create long form blog posts off of transcriptions of my podcast. They're okay. Whenever I get those, they're not even close to being ready to be published. I have to do not a full rewrite. I can use parts of it, and I have published some that have done fine. They don't blow people away. Again, I think they'll get better. I'm curious to see how tools like that get better. We're at the very beginning. But at least in the business that I do, it is still such a people-driven, relationship-driven business. When I'm asked to come in to do any sort of work, whether it's a speech or a leadership circle or build a leadership development program, that's a people-driven thing. I think all of us should have our eyes open to potential tools that could help us, that could assist us, that maybe could get us started, or maybe could just create bullet points or give us ideas. I think that's great. I think we should use those, but that's really just like the pre-first draft version. So, and my first drafts of things are terrible. So I think I look at those as like the pre-first draft, then the first draft, which is awful. Then we'll go through heavy edits. Then we'll write the next draft. Then we'll have to go through edits again. And eventually we'll get to something that's ready to be published. But as of today, I think that's kind of where we're at with that stuff. Well, I think what we're from that, and I agree with that, I've seen that, is you're going to see people that try to shortcut that per se and say, hey, we're going to try to go down that pathway. And the difference between someone that's able to stand up on stage or record a live video and actually have that ability and that content and that authenticity to communicate, even though there may be a little bit of flaw here and there. Like one thing that I noticed from, again, one of your last podcasts is the willingness to be very conversational and not so much of a reading a script. All of this, this content, all of it is conversational. It's not written on a script. Why? Because I'm more comfortable doing that, speaking extemporaneously, but I also want it to feel real. I want it to feel like you shared earlier that we're sitting at lunch or a coffee shop, just having a conversation. I come back to that and put a tab there. I think that's what people want of their leaders.
I agree. Yeah, I agree. I mean, when you think about the leaders in your life who you've been most inspired to follow and the qualities they possess and what they're like, that is at the top of the list. They're real, they're authentic, whether, like I said, it's a coach you've played for, a boss you've worked for, a teacher, anyone in any sort of leadership position. I think that's at the top of the list. So to me, there's not really ever a substitute for that. That's something that we should always be striving to be. And I think there's a lot of work to be done on yourself in order to be comfortable to be yourself. So a lot of reflective work, a lot of understanding what your core values are and the critical behaviors that prove your core values to be true, and questioning yourself, am I living these out? I think all of that is part of knowing yourself, being comfortable in your own skin, and then living out in an authentic way. But usually the ones who are able to do that, they've done a lot of work.
Yeah. Well, I think it's taken me a lot to get there. And it's the willingness to start pulling back the layer, or as I describe it, taking off the armor of the insecurities. And, whether that's insecurity, whether that, for me, one of the biggest ones that I've seen, and there's a sense that I can relate to it. The barrier that I have in relationships is intensity. And what I've learned is intensity is a divider. It drives people away. It pushes people away, that whether you want to intimidate or not, but that look of intensity makes people want to go, whoa, okay, just
people away. Tell you you're too intense?
Absolutely.
What do you mean? Like, what do you mean?
Too intense. It's the look. It's the drive. It's the push. I am going to get wherever I'm going to go, wherever I want to go it. And it's something that I share as a part of my community. And I'll share it for you. Just conversation. For me, where that came from, and I've been able to identify when that came from. And, there's a kind of go to the end here. When I realized it was a problem, it was a leadership role. And we were just having some conflict with different individuals. And I had this, I call it divine. It's spiritual. I'm a person of faith. And it was like, this is how you deal with things. And it was put my head down and just push. And if they didn't want to go with me, fine, go by the wayside. Yeah. And really probably a lot of learning from John Maxwell of putting your arm around people and going with them. That to me is a display of empathy. It's put your arm around people, walk with them. And where I realized intensity became a barrier was when my brother died when I was in high school. And don't know if you're familiar with the story, but after that happened, when I was talking to the sheriff and he's asking questions, and I'm like, I'll answer all the questions you have, but I have cows to milk in there. I'm going to go do that. And it was that intensity that got me through life. And people have shared, you're great, but you're intense. And that's where I've realized many times, and the leaders that I talk to and we establish and we go through it, when people are like, you walk in a room and you're just being you, and it's whether it's intimidation or not, in realizing that's the greatest barrier in leadership is intensity or unanticipated intimidation. Because, it's almost too much. And they're like, whoa, dude. Like,
wouldn't you think, though, wouldn't you attribute a lot of what you've accomplished to that intensity?
That's what's funny. And yes, but this is what it's come at a tremendous cost. It's come at a cost of relationships. It's actually, I think I wrote this down as a potential point, is that high level individual performers can be intimidating and intense, but yet how do they bring people with them? And we see that transition, right? You think back of yourself, right? You were a high level performer and then you move into that managerial role and you share a little bit of like I think you morphed in that sense because you share in Pursuit of Excellence how you, instead of throwing higher expectations on the high performers, you said, no, we're going to do this together. And I think inherently you did that in order to bring people together because you knew from being quarterbacks, like I can be the most intense quarterback in the game, but if my offensive tackle doesn't want to block for me, I'm dead, right?
Yeah.
It's not going to work. And I think that happens in leadership. And that's where I've realized that intensity is an absolute barrier in leadership. It's too much. It's a divider. And what I've understood is people are like, well, what about passion? I said, that's different. Passion invites, compassion binds, intensity divides and pushes people away. And there's a big difference. It's that, think about an intense person. What do they look like, right? You know, furrowed brow, they're just deep, beady, you know, intense. No, I'll go over here. Like, we'll go hang out in the corner and just chat, Ryan, right? That's, and you think about it as I describe it, it's like, oh, I've been there.
Yeah, it's a good point. I haven't thought of it that deeply, but that makes a lot of sense. And it's also like striking that balance though, right? Knowing that it is partially why it's helped you as an individual probably do what you've done, but then knowing too how it, like being aware enough that if it is dividing or if it is pushing people away, that's a problem, and how to scale that back when you're trying to when you're trying to do something with other people where you need a team. Because every once in a while, yes, you can do things like being intense as trying to get like an individual project done probably works. But for things that usually take other people, which most things do, okay, now I need to understand how one of my kind of innate talents, because I do think there's a talent there and skills, I need to pull back a little bit.
John Maxwell was one that, through some of his books, really taught me that lesson. He had to deal with that. He was in his 40s and he was like, people are like, we don't want to work with you. And he had to like,
I bet a lot of people have. Like, I bet a lot of people like you have. Like, I mean, this is probably a common theme, huh?
It's common, but no one talks about it.
Yeah.
Because as you just said, it's intensity is applauded. Oh, we want that intense, driven, but then intensity turns to intimidation real quick. Mm-hmm. And it's when it's too much. And if I look at, you know, again, the example mentor that John's been to me, and it's like, I see him interact with people and him acknowledging and saying, hey, you know, I have to go with people. He'll say that, you know, you can finish the race. Great. But if you're the only one, you didn't accomplish much, right? You've heard that from him. And I agree with him. That's where I had to really realign myself and understand, oh, that's a major barrier. And if I can learn, I was talking to Mark Cole, his CEO, and I said, Mark, we were talking about this. And I said, I had to learn to be lazy. He's like, I get it. I get it. and for people that get it, they get it. And for people that don't, they're like, huh? I'm like, people would not describe me as lazy. People would not describe you as lazy, right, Ryan? Never would. But yet in my mind, I had to slow down to go at the pace with others so that we could pick up pace together.
It's a good, it's a good call. It's an interesting thing to think about because you're going to be more impactful with a group most likely than trying to just attack everything on your own.
Let me layer this in a little deeper. How would you define empathy? And you can just off the cuff. You don't have to have
thinking of putting myself in other people's shoes, thinking of what it's like to be them, thinking of what it's like to view the world through their eyes and experience it from their perspective instead of my own.
Okay. So that's a commonly held definition. And as I've read those and as I've thought about those, and again, tongue in cheek, laugh with this. I said, if I put myself in their shoes, that's going to hurt them because where are they? They're in their shoes too. If I'm going to try to see things through their eyes again, and think about it in this, all right, but there's a deeper layer is if I'm trying to see it through their eyes, well, then I'm wearing their skin. Okay. That's not comfortable, but this is what I came up with one day. And it comes back to this intensity factor. Is empathy is putting your arm around someone and walking with them. Because if I put my arm around them and walk with them, I have to care for them. I have to be vulnerable enough. Think about it. If I put my arm out, put her on somebody, I'm vulnerable, right? They could, you think about it in a war site, somebody stab me. Put my arm around them and walk with them. And then there's also this context, and it's biblical in reference, but it makes sense to me. Don't be unequally yoked. Okay. If I put my arm around someone and I walk with them and I'm dragging them, I'm going to end up strangling them. At the same point, if they're walking faster than me, I'm going to pull them back. If their arms around me, we have to be in step. And to me, if I'm practicing empathy, then there's no place for my intensity, because my intensity is going to drive me to go faster than maybe what others can.
That's a good point. Yeah, that makes sense. I like it.
So let me go a complete different direction. We talked about your daughters earlier, and I really want to know, as they're getting older and, you're going to their events this weekend, what have being involved in their lives, either coaching them or watching other coaches coach them, what has that taught you about leadership? What has that taught you about championing the pursuit of excellence for yourself and others?
The thing I think about most is patience. I can't expect them to be exactly like me. They're not. They have their own points of view, their own style, their own way to approach what they do. I think if you asked me this 5 years ago, I probably got frustrated more often if I felt like they showed up at a sporting event. It's probably where this happened the most, and did not necessarily perform like I would. And that's that's kind of an egocentric way to view the world.
Describe that. Describe that a little bit.
If they didn't give maximum effort, if they didn't get super pissed off when they lost, if they didn't, those types of things.
Yeah.
Which now is actually kind of coming out in our youngest daughter, our 8-year-old Charlie, who I do coach her basketball team, but Miranda, my wife, says she's the one who acts the most like I did when I played. And I don't know if that's a good thing. But I'd say I have learned a lot more about being a patient, about trying to meet them where they are and be interested in what they're interested in, instead of just steering them into whatever I'm most into. Buzz Williams came on my show a few months ago, and we talked about writing letters to our kids. And these letters, and I had not ever done that, and other outside of the normal birthday or holidays, and so that's one of the I like taking learnings from the podcast and actually taking action on it. I think it's not that useful just to have these conversations but never do anything with them. So that's one of the things I started incorporating, and it's a great practice to be writing those letters, because I like forcing functions. It works as a forcing function to have a conversation with my wife to say, okay, what is going on with each of them in their lives, that maybe I missed, what's something that's happening, so that when I write these letters, I can reference them and make it about them, not about me, sharing a motivational quote or something like that. They don't care about that. They roll their eyes at the stuff I do. They laugh.
Yep.
Right now they give my merch out to all their friends, which is hilarious to see it popping up at school, but they still make fun of me directly to my face. So to me, it's really just trying to meet them where they are, figure out what they're most into, go there and show up there and be interested in them and care for them and love them unconditionally. I've learned a lot more about what unconditional love means. That means, loving somebody with no conditions. That means it doesn't, obviously I don't want them to be mean-spirited or to be unkind or to do any of those things. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying there's no conditions. You don't have to play this sport or do this thing or win this game. That's conditional love. And I have learned a lot more about that with the help of a very great partner, about it's our job to show up for them and show them unconditional love, and work in progress for sure. But that's just, those are the things that I probably think about more than anything in my life.
Has that affected how you see your work for others?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's also made me much more patient with just everything in life and every person I come across, and certainly a lot less judgmental. Everyone has a story, everyone has a past, everyone has things going on in their life, and I think the spectrum of being judgmental and being curious are their opposites. And maybe if at some points in your life, and for me, it was when I was probably less mature and not as grown up as I am now, but I was down to this end of the spectrum where very judgmental. And I think as I've grown and talked to more people, and certainly being a dad has helped with this, I think I've moved down that scale closer towards the other end. I hope, at least I try, this is aspirational, to approach people with curiosity far more than judgment. And that is, I think that's a skill, man. I think I really do. And it's something that I think about a lot, try to work on and approach all people that way. And I think that's been helpful. I think that can help you connect better with people too. And that's certainly a part of what I do for a living.
There's a tie in here I really equate the pursuit of excellence to the pursuit. It's a curiosity. Yeah. It's a drive to curiosity that if you're, and again, I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper into the heart context of all this, is what drives you for that pursuit?
Well, I mean, my purpose is to inspire others to both value and pursue excellence in themselves. I think excellence is really about being better tomorrow than you are today. And there's two parts of that statement. Is first, you have to value it. Not everybody does. I want to inspire people to value excellence. I want them to value the thought of getting better. And then I want to inspire people to pursue it. And that takes a lot of work. And so if you obviously you've read through it and you see that the bulk of the leadership that I talk about is the leading yourself part. Is to working on yourself, is to doing that necessary work. Because I also, come across people in life, and it's just interesting to see the difference between those who consistently and regularly do that work on themselves versus the ones who don't. And it's just, you're just in dramatically different places. And I think the ones who are willing to hold the mirror up close, the ones who are willing to have prompts for themselves each night, the ones who are willing to do that necessary work, not only are they in a better position today, but they're setting themselves to be in a much better position next year, the year after. It all compounds. It's really powerful. Yeah. So that's also exciting to me, is because maybe I can give a talk, or I can release an episode and it changes somebody. I mean, that's like the transformational element of leadership. And as you know, you start getting feedback from people when you're out there in the world and you're willing to kind of publicly do this work, whether it's a podcast, it's a book, it's speaking, whatever. And I'll tell you, Tyler, one of some of the coolest emails I get. Let's say somebody is in one of my leadership circles, and this has happened a few times, and it's emotional when it does. The spouse, not the person themselves, but the spouse of the person sends me a note separate without even telling their husband or wife. And they say, hey, initially we had a conversation about my partner being in one of your circles. It was too much money. I didn't want them to do it. But, he stood on the table to say, I really want to do this. I hope you'll support me. And I did. And not only has he, the 3 years that have gone by since he's been a part of that, not only has he been promoted multiple times, are we now building an addition on our house because of how he's been a great provider, but he's a much more present husband, a much more present dad. He's a much better thank you note writer. He writes me love notes. He's a better gift giver. He's a better journal entry writer. They list all these things off that are very specific. And those are the things bring you to tears, man. They seriously do, because I didn't know if that was necessarily you don't set out to do those things. At least I didn't really think about that. I think about, okay, how can I help somebody build a great career? Or how can I help them get promoted? Or how can I help them hit whatever goal they've set business wise? I didn't think about the fact that their wife may send me a note thanking me and thanking the people in in my company to say, hey, they're doing great at work. And I know that was original intention, but even more important, they're doing so much better at home, and that is awesome. And that's life-changing stuff, man. I mean, that changes the arc of not only them and that person you're working with, but for all of the people around them, most importantly, their partner and their kids. So to me, like that's what it's all about. Like when you think about purpose or why do you work so hard to do this stuff, I think of those notes right at the top of the list.
I mean, that's why I'm doing this, right? Yeah. You talk about it and, different stages, different careers, and I guess different, evolutions there. And I think about the impactful encouragement to me was do something significant, right? Mm-hmm. And, I wrestled with doing this because it's like, we go back to when I very first asked you a couple of years ago. Now, it's been like 5 years ago to be a guest on Podcast Head then with my wife, and she hated it. I loved it because I loved these conversations and learning and growing. And you were gracious enough to join me then. And I think I want to have more of those conversations. And that's why I'm doing this, but it's not for me. I'm growing. So I do this, but it's also, can someone else learn and grow from it? That's not going to affect them, but everyone else that they're in contact with. Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's
that like the kind of the ripple effect, right? It starts here and it goes out wide amongst all of the people that they interact with. And then that has a more ripple effect too. So I think thinking about the impact, I actually had a boss one day say this in he wasn't actually that good, but this was a good statement that he did say. He said, "You're now going to be the dinner table conversation of the 40 people that you're leading." And I was like, it's kind of a good way to think about it. It's a good way to think about it. And like you're going to have an effect on them at the dinner table as people talk about their boss, right? At the dinner table. So I do think about that. Like you think about the people that you're impacting. It's not just the one individual, but it's all of the people in their lives too. And that ends up being a lot of people.
Yeah. I mean, there's a kind of a thought I have here is it's understanding, where does the pursuit of excellence intersect with significance? And I think you just described it, right? That's the point where it's like, I have to, it's something I share. I don't call it the pursuit of excellence. I think it's a great way to describe it though, that my desire is to be better today than I was yesterday, with the intention and purpose to be better tomorrow than I am today. And that's been something implied upon me that I work at every day. And it's amazing, as you say, as I've committed to that, and I've learned and grown in ways that I would have never been able to. And then I think about how that has had significance in other people's lives.
Yeah. What has changed, you think, from the beginning in that first conversation, now that years have passed? What's changed the most, or what's been one of the bigger learnings that's made you maybe rethink something?
I had that question for you, but I will answer that first, and you have to oblige me as well. For me, it is being more cognizant. So I have in our group, Mike's, the 4 barriers of leadership, and I've talked about that already. It's insecurity, which has been huge for me to get over. Do I have enough value? Do I have any worth? Do people want to listen to me? Coming from a background in agriculture and look at this space that we're in and leadership and everything else, it's like I grew up in the world where farmers were laughed at because they weren't as smart. They weren't whatever. Now our society is like, man, the most trusted and admired people in our society right now are farmers. Been documented. It's crazy. And yet trying to understand what value I have, and then getting to a point, my value is that I'm willing to be vulnerable and be, I'm trying to figure this out and work through it. And that those barriers of insecurity, inactivity, not wanting to do it because I'm afraid of what might happen, or if they say no, the insensitivity. I didn't know what I didn't know. And then the last one we mentioned earlier was the intensity, and that being the reaction to a traumatic experience that I just had to deal with. But that caused where so many people are like, man, you're an a-hole. It's like, I love and I care you. I'm just trying to protect myself. And me growing through that and being able to have those conversations, work on it myself, but work on it within others and share those and be like, oh, okay, now it's even more meaningful because of what you just shared about the gentleman in your leadership circle whose wife said, but you probably don't understand the impact you've made.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Yeah, man.
What about you?
Awesome.
Like the 8 years,
I think a combination of things happen. One, it's my growth is probably compounded over the time from doing so much of it, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
I would say you become much more, or at least I would become much more reasonable and less black and white and more gray. What I mean by that is that
I get it.
You're kind of this or that, and that's just not how the world operates. It doesn't work that way. It's there's usually a lot of gray involved. And then I think the other element of it that I think has changed the most is just being, as mentioned before, when your job is to ask people questions and learn about their stories and learn about their life experiences, and you realize, oh, like we all have such different backgrounds. We all have such like different events in your life have obviously impact you in a great way. Stop judging people for maybe making mistakes or maybe doing something wrong. I mean, I think back to one of my very early episodes with Maurice Claret. I mean, I remember even before starting talking to him saying, man, this guy had everything and he just threw it all away. He was a All-American as a freshman at Ohio State, winning a national title, getting drafted to play for the Broncos. And then he drives in a car and he's drunk and he's got vodka in his water bottles and he's got guns. I'm like, what is he thinking? Until you talk to him and you realize this guy grows up with a mom who's doing everything she can to support him, but's got to work all the time. No dad, and is selling drugs to get by, doing a lot of things that are illegal just to basically survive. And versus my background with two amazing parents and two amazing brothers and people who are like support you all the way from everything. They've taught me everything I know. It's just two dramatically different upbringings, and yet I'm being judgmental. I mean, that is just wrong. Now, that doesn't excuse poor behavior or say, hey, you can just do whatever you want and break the law. I'm not saying that, but it does just make you rethink being being so quick to say, oh my gosh, why would somebody do that? Or how do they blow their money and how are they broke? Yeah. Well, they didn't have the same financial upbringing as you did. Yeah. They didn't, to someone to teach them those things. So I think that's the biggest thing that has made me a bit better is just kind of being more open-minded. And I think effective leaders, they can be decisive and they can understand what they know, but they also have an open mind to learn more and to also wonder more instead of just saying like, that's that. I think that's a big thing that I've learned.
I know he's a big part of your life and mentor, and what that makes me think of is a level, 5 leader. It's that person, right? It's Jim Collins is talking about the good to great evolution. To me, that's the separator of good to great. The great are the ones that are willing to say, you know what? We didn't have the same experiences, but I value you because you have value. And my role as a leader is to help that value shine and just, whether explode or just, be more than what you ever thought it was.
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And big fan of the Jim Collins work, John Maxwell stuff. Like that stuff is huge, and really admire the way that they are able to take their key learnings and document them in these artifacts that we get to read over and over and over again. It's pretty amazing to see all the work they've done.
Well, I think what is great is, as we're both of the same age, think about moving into that generation, that gap, right? Between Gen X, we're Gen X, that millennial, but the gap between boomers and, the millennial Gen Z, it's how do we do a better job of leading? That's really why I have this podcast, is I want to empower, help people do that, to bridge that gap, because so many of us might have had great leaders or bad leaders, great examples of parents and mentors or none. And we're trying to figure that out. Like, it doesn't always have to be the way that everyone else did it, but yet we can learn and grow and develop and get better.
Yeah, that's a big responsibility, man. I like the way that you're thinking of that, but I think that is, it's a big thing to tackle, but a worthy cause, right? It's so important to figure out. I don't know. Do you meet with like high school or college kids and speak with them and meet with them?
Yeah, a lot,
Yeah.
because either
What do you think,
being involved in our high school or
what do you think
mentioned
of
soccer.
Yeah. What do you think of your overall feeling about the future and people of that age?
You know, that's fun to think about, because as you mentioned earlier, the ability to impact, I get it through this platform, and there's probably some of my daughter's friends that listen to this. I hear about it every once in a while, and whatever else, but it's like, if I can share a little bit of my failures and be able to help them, but also, as you mentioned, Maurice, he didn't have a guy in his life to put his arm around him and say, hey, let me guide you. And if I can do that, and if I can show people that, hey, we can work through this together and be that example, the difference is, this is what I find, is whether it is that teenage, whether it is early 20s, they are yearning for someone to say, hey, help guide me. Help point me. I don't remember that when I was 21, 22. That wasn't a thing. And I've talked to others about this, a little bit younger. It's like, I was never encouraged, hey, go find a mentor. Ultimately, how I started this path of growth is like, man, I need a mentor. I need someone that's going to help me. It was more of, I always grew up and figure it out on your own. Just figure it out. Like, figure it out. And I think that was very generational, where it switched of, hey, go to people like Ryan. Go to people that are going to show you the way, that have been there. Seek that mentorship. That is what's new and different.
Yeah. But in a way, though, having to figure it out probably was helpful.
Very much.
Yeah.
Something I read this morning, though, you talk sometimes about Robert Greene, and one of his, I'm reading the 48 Laws of Power. This year, I'm spreading out through the year and really digging through it. And I get it. One of the comments today was, hey, profit off of the experiences of others. And, the most expensive way to learn is through your experiences. Yeah. And, in that, it's like, hey, to me, and what I shared today, and one of my thoughts was, the secret to, the shortcut of life is learning from someone else's experiences. That's that mentorship. And that's, what you share so much, right? That's why we're trying to share, want to share different ideas, is that's the shortcut.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to, there's one thing said for, you got to get on the field and learn from doing it yourself. And I think coupling that with then learning from the successes and failures and mistakes and triumphs of others is super helpful. And I think that's I think it's doing both of those things is a great way to learn, to get better, to probably maybe create your rate of speed to be a bit higher, is to go about it that way, as opposed to just one or just the other.
Yep, totally. I don't think you can. Well, it's like this, and I've heard you. If you want to really learn something, go teach it to someone else. Yeah. And the only way you can ever learn something is you have to do the work of learning it to be able to go teach someone else. But if someone can help you learn it at a faster, more effective rate, well, that means you should be able to, in a time frame, be able to teach and share with others. Yeah.
Yeah, man, that's true. I think one of the best learning tools in the world is putting yourself in the position of being a teacher, whether it's giving a speech, doing a podcast, meeting one-on-one with a mentee. Yeah. Putting yourself in the position to be a teacher, I think, is a great, great tool for learning.
What's something you're learning right now? Like, I'm learning this morning. I'm learning this yesterday. I'm learning.
So one of my issues with having a podcast that ships every week is constantly recording, constantly having to read a wide variety of books to prepare, all of that. I had Brian Kite on recently. I don't know. Have you talked to Brian?
Yep. I have not, but I know Brian.
Great dude. A great guy. Lives out in Denver. Brian had this point that we really hammered down on, which is you learn more through depth, not width.
Yes.
And so one of the things that I'm thinking about is going deeper on fewer topics instead of just trying to go wide. Mm-hmm. And then most importantly, taking action on the key learnings so that they're not just sitting in a notebook, but you're living them out. I mentioned the Buzz Williams element of, what is an action I can take to actually change lives, to do better, to make myself better? In that example, it's of writing letters to my kids every week, which I had not been doing until after talking to Buzz. So to me, it's about going deeper with fewer things that I'm learning, and then not only going deep on those topics, but taking those and actually doing something with them, putting them into play, putting them into action. So I'm working through that right now. I'm trying to get better. I still will prepare the same way. I still will be overly ready to go, but I also want to be better at taking action. And then a whole separate thing that I've been working on a lot quietly is speaking with people who have built a business like I'd like to build.
Okay.
But they're maybe 5 to 10 to 20 years ahead of me. Yeah. For example, Patrick Lencioni has become a close mentor and friend, and he opens up his business to any person I want to talk to at any time. And his COO, Cody, and I have regular conversations as well as other members of their team, because I think that the Table Group is a beautiful business who helps a lot of people. And and without getting into too much of kind of the boring details of just how that business was built over the past 20 years. So that's a separate thing that I'm really working on is meeting with people like Patrick Lencioni, like Don Miller, like Michael Bungay Stanier, these guys who over the last 20 years have built these amazing businesses. Them being kind enough to open up their doors to their COO, all of the people who were like in the trenches building it with them, so they know, oh man, the first however many years, it was a train wreck. Yeah. So like hearing those stories and how they kind of moved through those tougher times to create their offerings and figure out what their business actually is. Yeah. That's a fascinating thing for me that I'm currently working through myself. So to be able to lean on others and learn and have them completely open up their books is one, it's super helpful, but it's also inspiring to say, well, I want to do the same thing for other people. Like there's so many good people in the world, man. Like people are inherently good and kind that that's inspiring to see these kind of giants of the world say, whatever you need, man, whatever you need. Here's call these 10 people, like whatever you need, happy to help out. And I think that's another area that I've gone deep on and haven't really shared publicly because there's nothing nothing really to share. Yeah, it's really about just trying to kind of build something that sustains over time.
Yeah. I see it's the top of the hour. I want to be respectful. We had an hour booked. I have more time. Do you? It's your call.
Sure.
Keep going.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
So that is one area that I would say that I've been very, as far as going deeper, that I've really tried to focus on the last couple of years. And that is something that I caught myself at times. I learned this from John, actually, in one of his books. And he goes, it's better. This is how I internalize. This is how I phrase it. It's better to be the sharpest knife in the kitchen than all the utensils in the drawer. And one of the intentions with my podcast is it's leadership. It's not the, that would be, times people, you get it way more than I do. I get it enough and I will get pitches. Hey, here's this author, here's this person, here's whatever. And sometimes it's great. I've had amazing guests and friends that have been developed through that. But there's a lot of times like it's not leadership centric. It's not to help people feel equipped to be able to bridge that. I don't know what I'm doing and what does real leadership look like? And so I've been very specific there. Part of it is because of that. It's like, if I'm trying to learn in so many areas, I just get scattered. And I appreciate what you're saying. And it's I don't want to say it's daunting at times, but there are times where I have to be like, all right, I want to put out great content for people. That means I'm going to prepare. You know, it is for me to do a podcast. It's about a full day of prep. That's for me. If it's a full day, it's 8 to whatever hours, but all of it. I enjoy that. Like I would be mortified to go on a show and not have that preparation, be able to say, honor the person that's there. But also when you're trying to do all the other things and you're trying to focus on learning yourself so you bring more value, man, it can get overwhelming. And that's where I have made the conscious effort and reminded myself, find a couple of areas. Where do I specifically want to grow? But then knowing that if I'm focusing the interviews like this along that path, then that's part of it for myself, but also keeping me so I don't get scattered and I don't get short and I don't get frustrated, and I do still to continue to enjoy it.
Yeah, I think that's the key part of, especially when, depending on how these things start or your purpose behind starting it. For me, it was another form of a leadership PhD program. There's no intention of any sort of a business, but then when it evolves to that, it's remembering what got you here, remembering what's the foundational element of whatever business is built off the back of the platform. So to me, that's another reminder, like you can't ever stop. If you ever get to the point where you stop, by you I mean me, if you ever get to the point where you stop enjoying the process, the prep, that's going to lead to bad things. And so I think that's, as just like you said, it's still one of my favorite parts about it is all of the preparation needed to do a great episode, because all of the opportunities have come because of that thing. So don't ever forget it, that's why. And I think that's sometimes when a podcast is built on the side as like, hey, this is going to be our marketing for our business, and there isn't like a deep curiosity or a deep love of the process, they usually don't end up being very good. It's just too hard to make it. They don't last. They're not that good. It's too hard to make them good if you don't love the process. And that goes for most things. Yeah. If you don't kind of love all of the work that goes into it. You know, Peyton Manning said the same thing when he stopped. Like, he took every rep and every practice that he ever had. And when he didn't either, like, couldn't do it because his arm didn't work, or he didn't want to do it, it was time to stop. And I think that's the case for most people, whatever it is they're doing, whether they're the quarterback of a team or they're running a podcast or a business. If you don't like and have like a desire for the grind parts of it that nobody sees, then you probably got to stop.
Or it's the wrong place for you. It's something you're doing because, I think obligated to do, but it's not, you're not living out your purpose. And if you're not doing that, then you're not serving people. Right.
Yeah, exactly.
As you evolve forward, you know, you mentioned earlier about trying to go deeper and at the same point, as you grow this, what's one area that you're like, this is foggy, but I'm excited to explore it?
Well, the business is one of them. Like, the business part's one of them, because especially when you're meeting with people who are 20 years, that have been doing it for 20 years, where I've only been doing it for a few, because it looks like, oh, wow, it's so clear. It's just like a machine, a flywheel was spinning. But then you ask them, okay, what was it like in year 2 or year 3? Yeah. And that's when you kind of say, oh, I get it. Like, there are just certain necessary steps to figure things out. So I'd say that's one part of it. And then the other part that will always be foggy, or I don't know, maybe it won't, but it currently is writing. I mean, writing is the toughest thing. Publishing a good book is one of the most challenging things in the world, for me at least, because it takes many drafts and many editors and people helping out to get something from an idea to properly structured and have a point and have make a proper argument that's backed up with entertaining stories and the empirical evidence to prove it true, and practical takeaways, practical action that a reader could take. Like, that is each page, each section, each subsection of a chapter is a lot. There are a lot of hands touching it. There's a lot of thought. There's a lot that was started and gone all the way to completion that then goes straight in the trash. And so it's still, if you use the phrase like foggy or what's still really hard, that. Now, that's also why I will always do it. Or at least I can't envision a day stopping doing that, because I think when I'm in book writing mode, which I am most of the time, nothing clarifies your thinking more. Nothing creates more. It's one of the greatest forcing functions for me, is because I have to always be on the lookout for interesting stories and the science to back up the story, and then the practical application for the reader. When you're always in that mode, I end up being just better at everything else that I do. Yeah, so I think that's another good reason, not only to get the cool artifact, to have the thing, which I love. That's really cool. I do like that. But it's all of the person you become along the way in order to get the artifact is really more of the reward than anything else.
I've interacted with enough authors, whether it's through this platform or that, most people are like, writing is not fun. It is not this glamorous what people think, but the process and or what I learned by doing it, man, that was invaluable.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, it's not really like hiking up the mountain and getting there. It's the person that you become, the person that it takes in order to do that thing, whatever the thing may be, all of the prep, all of the work, all of the resilience, all of the fighting through, all of the doubt, all of that stuff. Like, going through that process is really the ultimate reward, more so than whatever it is you get, whether you reach the top of the mountain or you reach a published book or whatever it may be. I think that's the part that you, if you really stop and think, is really the ultimate prize.
One last thing, and this showed up the other day. There was someone roughly our age that passed away, a popular person. And when I looked at the eulogy, it caught me by surprise. And there was a book that I had the author as a guest, and it's called My Daily Leadership, Antonio Garrido. And in that encourages you to write a eulogy and how impactful that is. And when I read this person's eulogy, my heart hurt. Because one of the things that why I do what I do, why I think you do what you do, is not to be the host of the Impact Driven Leader podcast. It's not to be the host of the Learning Leader group and podcast, all of that. If you're writing that, or maybe you have written, that'd be awesome if you have. What's that first line?
Yeah, I have. I have the song that's playing. I have the person who's reading it, my daughter Charlie. The bulk of the eulogy talks about our days in the summer when I leave my studio at 3:00 so I could throw her in the pool until my arms fall off, and how that created the biggest smile in the world. So the bulk of what is in that is about our family, is about our time together. There may be little snippets about the impact on people from the other work, but almost all of it, I do think it's a great exercise. It's emotional. It makes you think. It also can help you make decisions. When people ask, like, you leave every day in June and July at 3, I do. Yes. And now part of how I do that is I plan well ahead so that when it's cold here in Ohio, I do a lot more than when it's warm. Specifically in the summer months when she's not in school and our older ones aren't in school, so that there's more to do. So my days are designed differently. I realize not everybody can do that. Some people, you do got to kind of clock in. You got to be there. I get it. I don't, though. And because I don't, based on what I want that eulogy to say, my actions then need to follow, so that the things that she and my whole family remembers are those things more so than any book or any podcast. I mean, like I said, they don't care about that. I mean, they may at some point, if somebody else brings it up, they may kind of smile and talk about it, but for the most part, they don't care about that. And that's ultimately what matters the most. So to me, I would hope it would be all about that. And so I try to make sure that my actions follow what I want that to be about.
I love it. I appreciate that.
Yep.
Ryan, appreciate the conversation, the encouragement that you've given me over the years. It's been great. Thank you. And I'm excited that Pursuit of Excellence is our book for March. So
thanks man. I appreciate the support, dude. It means a lot, and spread the good word. I know people, you're an influential dude and people listen to you. So it means a lot that you would think there's a lot of books out there. So I appreciate you choosing mine as one of them, or two of them.
Yeah, both of them. It's good.
Yeah.
We're just waiting for that third. So no pressure.
Hopefully January. We'll see.
Okay. Well, awesome. Ryan, thank you.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it, Tyler.
There's as I look over my notes and I think about this time that, Ryan and I had, and one of the things I want to focus on, you have to value getting better, not for yourself, but for others. Ryan talked about his evolution of just either his personality or whatever it may be, but going from being judgmental to curiosity. I believe that's an evolution in growth. I believe that's also as a result of coming to grips and appreciating our insecurities and understanding those barriers that I discussed, that hopefully you're familiar with as a listener of this podcast and being a part of this community, being willing to go deep in that area, knowing that that's going to yield benefits for others. Man, I believe that's the greatest opportunity for leaders today in our space. How can I go deeper in either myself and or the relationships I have with others, learning to be able to be better for others? You have to value getting better. And why value getting better? Because you value those around you. He talks a lot about that in the Pursuit of Excellence. And as I summarize, the Pursuit of Excellence is very much so, in my opinion, the drive of curiosity. It's that arc. And the more that you pursue excellence, and I think it lays it out, and Ryan laid it out so well, you go from wherever you're at, and as you continue up that arc and become more and more curious, you're pursuing excellence. Not for you, but it comes to that intersection of the pursuit of excellence where you find significance and where maybe you get a note or a letter about the impact that you made. That, to me, is why I'm doing that. That is why I want to serve and help other leaders be impact-driven leaders. That's very, very thing. Those experiences, those blessings, those beliefs that have been poured and shared into me. That's why we're doing this. That's why I'm here. That's why I have the workshop that I have. That's why I have the leadership circle, the round table that I have. Why? Because if we all grow, as I scratch my head, we all get better. And if we all get better, life is better. And we make that impact. Thanks for listening, and thanks for being here. I'm excited for you. I'm excited for you to join on the journey. If you want to learn more about the Impact Driven Leader Roundtable, we have a workshop coming up April 3rd and 4th. You can go to theimpactdrivenleader.com in order to sign up for that, get more information. Love for you to join, and we'll catch you later. See you next time.